Thank you very much. I first want to say thank you to Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, to the Seshadripuram Educational Trust and the Department of English there for honoring me with this invitation, and especially Professor Connor for doing all of the organization of it. Moving on, I've been teaching Shakespeare for, well, hate to admit it, but for 26 years on page and stage and on screen. So I have a lot to say about Shakespeare and the pleasure of teaching Shakespeare. However, what inspires me most is the exploration of how the bard's work is used to communicate diverse messages in its myriad adaptational contexts, national, historical, cultural, and of course, in sundry media forms. In this way, Shakespeare led me to global cinema, starting with the work of eminent Japanese auteur Akira Kurosawa. Let me share my screen with you now. There we go. Just a sec. There we go. There, everyone can see that, yes?
Yeah, ma'am, we can see.
Wonderful, okay. Akira Kurosawa really drew me into this sort of the cinematographic form of Shakespeare. So for the past 15 years, I've actually dedicated most of my teaching and my research work to Asian cinema, specializing in both Japanese and Indian film adaptations of Shakespeare. At the heart of my work on Asian cinema is the fertile and revelatory relationships between aesthetics, thematics, and religion in these films. And today I will be focusing on my first love in Asian cinematic Shakespeare, which of course is Akira Kurosawa. Let me go, there you go. I have written elsewhere that we lovers of Shakespeare are prone to remediating his work in our own images. Of course, this is a version of what esteemed scholar Terence Hawkes wrote 30 years ago, which is, Shakespeare doesn't mean, we mean by Shakespeare. Shakespeare's work survives 400 years on because it is so fertile. It ignites creativity in other artists and provides a vehicle through which to speak to their own moment and their communities. Today, we'll be investigating how Kurosawa spoke to the Japanese and to the world about the particular bellicosity of the 20th century, telling cautionary tales to motivate us to pursue a more peaceful future. I start with a passage from the Japanese national epic, and it begins like this. And the sound of the bell of the Gion temple echoes, the sound of the bell of the Gion temple echoes the impermanence of all things. The pale hue of the flower of the teak tree shows the truth that they who prosper must fall. The proud ones do not last long, but vanish like a spring night's dream. And the mighty ones too will perish in the end like dust before the wind. And that, of course, is from the tale of the Heike. These opening lines of the tale of the Heike, which is an epic account of the brutal civil war in 12th century Japan, beautifully express the Buddhist doctrine of impermanence. All that is in this world passes away. The magnificence of nature, the valiant warrior, the power of kings, the violence wrought upon others in order to gain higher earthly status and wealth does not secure immortality. Rather, that destruction accrues negative karma for the perpetrator, ensuring that the evildoer will continue to be reincarnated into this world of suffering. This cycle of dissolution and devastation thus continues on and on. It is this pessimistic conclusion about human life that filmmaker Akira Kurosawa exemplifies so masterfully and exquisitely in his 3 adaptations of Shakespeare tragedies, which you can see here on the PowerPoint. Throne of Blood from 1957, The Bad Sleep Well from 1960, and then Ron quite a bit later in 1985. And these, as you can see, are adaptations of Macbeth, Hamlet, and King Lear, respectively. This lecture explores the way in which these three films depict spiritual subjects and objects, such as the witches of Macbeth, the ghost of Hamlet's father, and the sadistic pagan gods of King Lear in manifestly Japanese forms. Through the auteur's consummate use of mise-en-scène, cinematography, sound, and editing, Kurosawa translates Shakespeare's various portrayals of early modern life into something distinctly Japanese. Starting with Throne of Blood in 1957, his adaptation of Macbeth, the Japanese title of this film is Kumo no Sujo, which literally translates as the Castle of the Spider's Web. And this is a Jidai Geiki, that means period film. It's set in the 16th century during the very bloody age of the country at war, or the Warring States period, which is called Sengoku Jidai. This was an era of battling warlords, internecine struggles, murder, and treachery. No central political government ruled the nation at that time, and it devolved into complete chaos. Kurosawa actually set 4 films of his during this Sengoku Jidai period, which is very unusual for samurai films. They're almost always set earlier than this, not when the samurai world is falling apart, but when it is thriving. And these 2 adaptations of Shakespeare, including the one of Macbeth, Throne of Blood, and of course, Ron in 1985, both are set in this Sengoku Jidai Warring States period. Stephen Prince argues that Kurosawa creates an era even more bloody than the historical medieval Japan, instead giving us battles filtered through his perceptions as a 20th century artist well acquainted with large-scale slaughters of his own time. The sense of apocalypse in the films is not that of the 16th century, but of now, the 20th century. This piece of artistic license reveals Kurosawa's concern with the extreme violence of the 20th century and his own nation's participation in it. As a humanist, he disliked and distrusted the militarism and the ultranationalism that had been engendered by Japan in the first half of the 20th century. And he believed that it perpetuated the cycle of violence and destruction. In an interview, Kurosawa once declared, "When I look at Japanese history, or the history of the world for that matter, what I see is how man repeats himself over and over." He is talking about the unending patterns of human destruction that, as he makes evident in these films, haunt and profoundly disturb him throughout his life. Kurosawa chose to adapt Shakespeare's Macbeth in the 1950s because he saw the potential to make a statement about the zeitgeist of the mid-20th century through this Jacobean English play about a medieval Scottish king. And Kurosawa recognized the brutal factionalism of 16th century Japan in Macbeth's narrative as well. In Throne of Blood, Kurosawa sets out to make a very stylized film, eschewing realism that was prevalent in much of the Japanese cinema of the time, both Jidai Geiki and Gendai Geiki. Those are contemporary set films. In terms of plot and aesthetics, this is a very tightly structured film. There is much of the English medieval mystery play or morality play in it. Donald Ritchie-averse, it is perhaps because he is here exclusively concerned with limitation, with negation, death, that Kurosawa, for the first time ever, creates a formal film. He himself called it an experiment, which I think makes this film very interesting indeed. In this experiment, he attempted to make a film using elements of traditional Japanese no drama, a form of theatrical performance closely allied with Buddhism and Shinto rituals. Ana Laura Zambrano has argued that Kurosawa's treatment of reality in Throne of Blood owes more to the ghostly world of No than it does to any particular Western theatrical tradition. One way of classifying No drama is, in fact, according to the level of reality that is presented in a given play. Kurosawa, of course, takes his cue from ghostly No or Mugen No in Throne of Blood. It is a meeting of the two realities, the natural and the supernatural, that is a staple ingredient of this phantasmal node that he really uses here in Throne of Blood. This combination of realities can be seen graphically in the orchestration of one scene early in the film, in which the battle-worn Washizu and Miki, the Macbeth and Banquo characters, ride vigorously through the spider's web forest, searching for a way out of the tangled, confusing, natural labyrinth on their way to Spiderweb Castle. Here you can see, by the way, Washizu, who is Macbeth, who is making a face, and is obviously his facial hair is also arranged in this way, making the face of the No Warrior mask, which you can see right here on the slide. You can see he's purposefully emulating the look of the mask itself from the No Theater. This sequence I'm talking about early in the film with the two riders, Macbeth and Banquo, that is Washizu and Miki. This sequence begins with them wearing full battle armor. They're coming back from war, just as the war that opens Macbeth. They're riding their horses through a landscape that is both natural, because it's a dense forest, but also very supernatural. It is a haven for ghosts, gods, and evil spirits. And it traps these soldiers in its sylvan clutches by presenting an unnavigable maze of shadowy skeletal trunks and branches. And you see three different shots of these trunks and branches that form these webs in front of the camera. And some of them you can see the warriors sort of in mists behind them. You can see the spiritual atmosphere, but it's always filtered through the web of the forest. The scene itself starts with a still long shot of Washizu and Miki in the misty distance, charging toward the camera through the forest as rain pours down upon them and the thunderclaps punctuate the scene. The two stop in a full shot, revealing the consternation on their faces. Washizu looks up, and we are given a point of view shot of him looking up at the forest, at the top of the forest, with sunlight pouring through the top of the forest. At the same time, rain is pouring down. And this is where he essentially says, Washizu, so fair and foul a day I have not seen, right? The famous line, of course, from Macbeth. The chiaroscuro play of light and shadow is eloquent. The men immediately resume this frantic journey, trying to make their way out of this forest that they think they know. And Kurosawa gives us this interesting Eisensteinian collage, these juxtapositional quick cuts that follow the men as they go to and fro, trying to find their way out of this forest. Again, you get that sense of the confusion from the four stills in the slide there. These shots occur from diverse angles. One aspect of this frenzied montage that hasn't really been talked about very much is that Kurosawa in this montage actually uses jump cuts. He elides time between these shots. This avant-garde editing actually is smoothed over, sewn together by the sound of the horse's hooves pounding the earth that continues without temporal breakage. So there's this disjunction between time and space. Sorry. At one point, they hear a cackle in the forest, and the two men think that they have stumbled upon something evil, and they go racing around trying to kill the evil. When they arrive at the source of the cackle, this is what they find: a reed hut from which the sounds emanate, and this old woman squatting on the ground, spinning thread from a smaller pool to a larger one as she chants orthodox Mahayana Buddhist doctrine. Let's see here. Men's lives are as meaningless as the lives of insects, the terrible folly of such suffering. A man lives but as briefly as a flower, destined all too soon to decay into the stink of flesh. Humanity strives all its days to sear its own flesh in the flames of base desire. As Jack Jorgens notes, there is a sharp juxtaposition between the warriors who are armed to the teeth in this scene and this female spirit who seems tantalizingly defenseless to them in her soft robe, as you can see here, just peacefully sitting alone in this flimsy stick hut, seemingly held together by spiders' webs, armed only with words, laughter, and this unshakable self-possession, unquote. She did not need to look up at the two warriors as she chants this ancient wisdom, because there's nothing here that she has not seen before. The human condition never changes. Zambrano explains that the forest spirit in this film is made up to resemble a specific no mask, that of the mountain witch Yama-uba, which you see here, of course, below the still. And you can see very clearly that she's made up to resemble the mask. This mask is used for the play called Yama-uba. Like her no weird sister, this crone that Kurosawa gives us is at the spinning wheel, and she is gifted with supernatural insight into the progress of human affairs and the dark secrets of the human heart. The message of the film is made clear by the Buddhist doctrine directly presented by this Shinto mountain witch in this scene. When one puts this into the mise-en-scène, the spider web forest, we can see sort of the eerie uncanniness of this moment. The allure of power and wealth always has and always will entangle humankind in its strong web of illusion. There's no escape from that. The circular paths that Washizo and Miki ride so frantically before encountering this Yama-uba, and the subsequent continuation of their hapless search for an exit from the tangled web, turn out to be a type of perverse or neurotic reiteration of the Buddhist ritual meditation practice of circumambulation and the repetition of the Nembutsu, the chanting of the name of Amida or Amitabha Buddha, the deity who can guarantee access to the Pure Land after death. However, these warriors are trapped in the cycle of samsara as they survive by their destruction of life. They will perpetually be caught in the spider's web, and the calm wisdom of the Yama-uba is displayed by the lengthening of the shots in the sequence, particularly the shots of her, which actually stretch beginning from about 8 seconds by the end to quite a long shot of 30 seconds long. All right, I'm going to move on to the next film, The Bad Sleep Well. The Bad Sleep Well, again made in 1960, is a film noir emulation. Kurosawa is playing with the film noir tropes here, and it's set in a company. It's a corporate noir hamlet. Kurosawa told the great Japanese film scholar Donald Ritchie, "I wanted to make a movie of some social significance. At last I decided to do something about corruption, because it has always seemed to me that graft, bribery, etc. at the public level is one of the worst crimes that there is. These people hide behind the facade of some great company or corporation, and consequently no one knows how dreadful they really are, what awful things they do. Exposing them was, I thought, a socially significant act." So we had a real ethical impetus to make this particular film and this adaptation of Hamlet. Kurosawa's Bad Sleep Well is full of facades, performances, and ritual. Indeed, in a number of scenes, these three elements are one and the same. This film is loosely based on Shakespeare's Hamlet, but the resemblance is undeniable. A son, Nishi, seeks to revenge the forced suicide of his father, Furia, by taking on a friend's identity and antic disposition, so to speak, and infiltrating the corporation whose executives murdered his father. Corporate noir. Nishi has worked his way up to being the chief assistant to a high-ranking corrupt bureaucrat, Iwabuchi, in the Japan Unused Land Development Public Corporation. Even the name is sort of a parody of the names of these corporations. And the film opens with the arranged wedding of Nishi to Iwabuchi's disabled daughter, Yoshiko, the Ophelia figure, staged in the corporation's headquarters. And that's the still that you see here, very carefully staged, very symmetrical, everything controlled and circumscribed. It is a spectacle of political and social maneuvering that has been hailed as one of the finest sequences in any of Kurosawa's film, this wedding sequences, and it is stupendous. Mitsuhiro Yoshimoto argues that this film purposefully steers away from realism in several ways, despite it being a Gendai Geiki, that is, a film set in contemporary times. This film seems to lack establishing shots, and it's constantly being self-reflexive by showing performances of various kinds on the screen, reminding you that you're watching a performance, including this wedding, which is very much a staged performance, as you can see again in the blocking here. Yoshimoto contends that in Bad Sleep Well, the mechanism of corruption and the true identities of the corrupt officials are protected by this format of spatial fragmentation, staged performances, and fragmentary subject positions, unquote. These three aspects appear in a poignant scene in which Nishi takes a corporate patsy, Wada, to his own funeral. It's unusual. To his own funeral. Wada has been used to further corruption plots by the three big kingpins of the corporation that we were introduced to in this film. And these three kingpins believe they have successfully manipulated Wada into committing suicide. Nishi, knowing of this plot, stops Wada on the edge of the volcano he's about to throw himself into, and saves him. However, Nishi sets the stage here by taking Wada to his own funeral to see what these corporate guys are really saying about him. Nishi sets the stage for his own masquerade of revenge by leaving Wada's possession on the volcano, giving the appearance and the assumption that, of course, Wada did die there. So, a few days later, the corporation choreographs a very lavish Buddhist funeral for Wada, complete with authentic grieving officials. And Nishi announces to Wada, they put on quite a show. A 5-tier altar, 3 priests. It turns this religious ritual once again into a performance and a show, like so many of the performances and shows throughout the film. The funeral scene opens with a long shot of Nishi's car driving up to the temple parking lot, just a little bit behind the ceremonial proceedings. And we're given a medium shot from behind Nishi, which you see here. Nishi and Wada next to him, who are sitting in the front seat, watching Wada's funeral through the rain and the windshield, as if they were at a sort of drive-in movie. We're watching a movie of them watching the funeral as a movie. This is a shot that Kurosawa was going to return to several times during the sequence. Soon after this shot, though, there is a full shot, a closer shot of this ostentatious white altar and the wife and the daughter of Wada kneeling in their true grief, bowing to mourners. Throughout the scene, we can hear the sutras being chanted by the priests. We can hear the beating of the wooden drum in this type of ceremony. There are lots of close-ups of poor Wada, and you can see Wada and Nishi here at the bottom. Lots of close-ups of Wada's face as he watches with horror his very own funeral. We can see, of course, the very elaborate 5-tiered altar that the corporation pays for this man. They think they prodded into committing suicide. It's all a show. And then you see the genuine mourning of the family just below that. Let's see. While this happens, though, and while they watch the show, Wada asks Nishi why he is torturing. Sorry, Wada asks Nishi, why are you torturing me in this way? Nishi responds by taking out a tape player and playing for him what his friends actually think about him. A conversation they'd had about him at a nightclub the night before, where Nishi recorded them. And what they actually say is that they're happy to get rid of Wada. They left him no choice but to commit suicide, and they agreed to drink and enjoy themselves that evening. As the recording rolls, we see medium shots of the men who are speaking so callously of Wada, and some of them you can see in the still there at the top. They were speaking so callously of Wada, we don't care if he's dead, we're glad he's gone. But here they are pretending to mourn. And that is obviously a part of the showmanship that this film foregrounds constantly. All right, moving forward. Donald Ritchie evocatively asserts about this film, the theme of the world is as a very wicked place indeed, sounded in Throne of Blood and Ron, here in The Bad Sleep Well becomes a major melody, a great cantus firmus over which the rest of the film is built. None of us can be as good as the world is bad. The innocent perish and the bad sleep well, which obviously The Bad Sleep Well is that the people who do the worst, the people who are vicious, sleep better than those who are virtuous. That's the idea here, a very pessimistic message indeed. Our final film is Ron, which does mean chaos or desolation of the soul, which is perfect for this very apocalyptic film. This is a warlords and other samurai Sengoku Jidai, King Lear. My first prologue here is from King Lear. You do me wrong to take me out of the grave. Thou art a soul in bliss, but I am bound upon a wheel of fire that mine own tears do scald like molten lead. Second prologue is from Kurosawa's own screenplay, describing the epic battle scene, which is the crux of the film, at the core of this film, the Stygian battle scene at the third castle. And you can see, obviously, it's still there. But this is the actual text that he wrote to describe this scene. There are no real sounds as the scroll, he means hell's scroll, the scroll unfolds like a daytime nightmare. It is a scene of human evil doing, the way of the demonic Ashura, as seen by the Buddha in tears. The music superimposed on these pictures is like the Buddha's heart, measured in beats of profound anguish. The chanting of a melody full of sorrow that begins like sobbing and rises gradually as it is repeated, like karmic cycles, then finally sounds like the wailing of countless Buddhas. Pretty impressive for someone who claims, again, to not be religious at all. Moving on. Kurosawa's final Shakespeare adaptation, Ran, is also set again in the Sengoku Jidai. Once again, we're in this mise-en-scène of Mount Fuji and the volcanic black rock landscape. Although Ran is far more barren and desolate, it was filmed almost entirely on these lava slopes in Mount Fuji. This reworking of Lear features an aging warlord patriarch, Hidetora, who is Lear, who gives his lands and properties that he's won brutally over the course of his life to his three sons, dividing them between the brothers Taro, Jiro, and Saburo, which just means first, second, and third son. In addition, Hidetora wears makeup, as you can see here, in the still and the mask next to it, resembling the no mask of the deranged old warrior figure. It's a very specific mask. It's not used all that often, which becomes simultaneously more apt and more tragic once the ruthless warlord descends into madness over the course of this narrative, as Lear does in the play. In this film, like Throne of Blood, we have much in common with the medieval English morality play and its adherence to stylized form, an evident message. The characters are types and the close-up shot is avoided. Yoshimoto observes that the scarcity of close-ups and the extensive use of long shots render even the principal characters abstract figures, and by preventing the spectator's identification with them, creates a sense of detachment that positions the spectators as distant observers of a drama of massive destruction. The final minutes of Kurosawa's magnificent epic film are where I'm going to focus on here. And here we're already here in the final minutes there. This features a long, somber funereal procession of soldiers carrying the bodies of Hidetora, just as in King Lear. He has died here at the end alongside Saburo, his Cordelia. And this is, again, their funeral procession. And this is, for the most part, filmed in one still very extreme long shot, as you can see, capturing the stark lava plain and the jagged shards of a ruined castle in the background on the sloping mountain directly behind them. Behind this, the smoky sky glows in an unearthly pale orange color, which has been described as a sort of nuclear haze for obvious reasons. There's definite reference to the nuclear holocaust in Japan here. The pale orange color is the sunset somewhere beyond the horizon. This desolate shot is a long take that lasts over a minute, which is uncomfortable and prolongs our contemplation of the death and destruction we have witnessed in the 2.5 hours of this epic film. After this, we have a series of shots that come closer to the serrated remains of a castle that punctuates the slope behind the now departed soldiers, as you can see here. This is a castle that Hidetora burnt down and destroyed while he was viciously killing all of the warlords around him, right? This surreal orange light provides eerie backlighting, and there's only silence on the soundtrack. You only can hear the wind hissing in this track, in this shot. We are allowed to absorb this over several seconds, and then Kurosawa cuts to a closer shot, and you can see the further shot here at the top, the slightly closer shot at the bottom where you can see that this little figure is actually a human. We still can't tell who he is, though. Then we cut a bit closer and we can tell that it is the character we've met named Tsurumaru, the blind victim of Hidetora's earlier predations on the neighboring warlord family. In fact, the sadistic Hidetora plucked out Tsurumaru's eyes himself when the boy was just a young child, in an echo of Gloucester's de-eyeing in King Lear. The blind man appears in the center of the frame holding a guide stick before him, feeling his way toward the edge of the wall, and the audience holds its breath. The camera holds steadily on him as he moves tentatively towards the verge, and when his stick reaches the edge, Tsurumaru stumbles. Right here, I've just given you the stage. Right before he stumbles, there is a high-pitched note sounded by a wooden no flute, the nokon, as the man stumbles, and this echoes the audience's shock and fear that he's going to go tumbling over. While he is regaining his balance, a scroll falls from inside of Tsurumaru's robe and tumbles down into the rubble, the pile of rocks below him, falling open in the process. And then Kurosawa cuts to a close-up of the scroll, and we see it contains an iconic image of the Amida Buddha, the Buddha who promises rebirth into the heavenly Pure Land. Tsurumaru's devout and saintly sister, Lady Sue, who had been Jiro's loyal wife and was beheaded a short time before this final scene, gave the scroll of Amida to Tsurumaru to comfort him and to alleviate suffering. However, when he attempts to pray to this deity, he gets no positive results. Tsurumaru keeps the scroll with him nonetheless, but when he loses his footing, he also loses any hope or comfort that the icon of Amida can bring him. Symbolically, even the hope for a rebirth into a beautiful Pure Land literally and figuratively falls away from him, and he's surrounded by nothing but the burnt orange smoke of hell. There is another cut to even a closer shot of this Amida. In fact, that's a closer shot, illuminated brightly around the golden haloed face of Amida. After the shot, Kurosawa reverses us out using the exact same moves of cutting from further away to further away to further away, literally creating a circular sequence of this scene. It's evident here that when we come full circle with this scene where we pull in, we step out, it is evident that Tsurumaru cannot move from where he is without someone to lead him, and he's achingly alone in this dissipated world. He will perish. The promise of salvation in the Pure Land has vanished, or perhaps it never existed at all. The final shot of the film, this extreme long shot depicting Tsurumaru being swallowed by this ruined world, is held for 7 seconds, as the first iteration of the shot was. The frame fades to black as the last high-pitched crescendo of the no flute sounds. The powerful imagery in this final scene of Ron communicates the hopelessness of the cycles of violence humanity chooses over and over, which is reflected in the circular structure of this scene. Of the scene, Kurosawa himself writes tellingly in the script, "The face of Amitabha looks sad." Sorry. The face of Amitabha looks sad. The sorrow of the Buddha reflects this filmmaker's perspective on life. The world will not change unless we steadily change human nature itself and our very way of thinking. We have to exorcise the essential evil in human nature. About Hidetora, his Lear figure, he says tellingly, forced ultimately to confront the consequences of his misdeeds, Hidetora is driven mad, but only by confronting his evil deeds head on can he transcend it and begin to struggle toward virtue. In conclusion, although hope is not offered in the filmic worlds of Throne of Blood, The Bad Sleep Well, or Ron, Kurosawa made these films because there is hope in our own world. In addition, we must note that these films differ from the many films in Kurosawa's oeuvre, which feature an individual hero or group of heroes, like Seven Samurai, of course, like Rashomon, and Akiru, we have individual heroes there. Kurosawa was a skeptical humanist whose penchant for moral codes and ethical behavior is evident in every one of his films, and he often uses Shinto and Buddhist elements to articulate these messages, as I've shown. He believed people were endowed with a power of choice and were therefore capable of transforming their environments. However, the bleak landscapes he witnessed after the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 and throughout World War II haunted him and his films throughout his life. It is not surprising, considering the many struggles of the Japanese people during this time and after the war, including nuclear holocaust at the end of the war, the American occupation from 45 to 52, economic hardships, the concomitant crises of identity and culture, and the overwhelming project, of course, of rebuilding the nation. In all three of Kurosawa's Shakespeare adaptations, he purposely uses non-realistic aesthetics, including no theaters, ritualistic conventions in Throne of Blood and Ron, and multiple self-reflexive stage performances within the narrative, of course, of Bad Sleep Well, to reflect on the often circumscribed nature of our lives, in which we play our roles, as Shakespeare says over and over. We follow the violent cycles established before us instead of choosing to free ourselves from the chains of attachment to power or wealth. Perhaps Kurosawa himself was a sad Buddha, but he chose to make these masterful dark adaptations of Shakespeare's finest tragedies because these cautionary tales might just have the potential to inspire us to choose peace instead of destruction. Indeed, Kurosawa says once again that only by confronting evil head on can you transcend it and begin to struggle toward virtue. And that concludes my talk. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and again for the invitation. If you would like to read more and more in depth on Kurosawa's Shakespeare adaptations and their relationship to No, please look for my forthcoming book, from Routledge, November 2022, Transcendence and Spirituality in Japanese Cinema. The link is there if you're interested, where I have a quite lengthy chapter that talks in more detail about these wonderful films. Thank you so much.
I thank the institution for providing me with this rare privilege of sharing this virtual platform for the third time, which has also forced me to think from fresh points of view, only not to be repetitive. Technology has brought distances together, but ironically enough, the same technology distanced us also this evening because of some flaw in my system, and I apologize for that. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Cassius says after Caesar's assassination, "How many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted over in states unborn and accents yet unknown?" Shakespeare meant that his play would be acted in various places and in various ages and in various languages. But I feel that Shakespeare was surely correct, but the variety with which his plays have been staged since then is definitely much more than even his wildest imagination could have perhaps envisaged. Teaching Shakespeare is a pleasure because there is a space in us for our intellectual play. As I had said before, there are cultural differences between Indian way of reading and Shakespeare's plays. But the essential human characteristics, their emotions, remain the same. That's what made Johnson say, Shakespeare doesn't have kings and queens, he has only men and women. But teaching Shakespeare in an Indian environment, especially to those who take English as a language, is a different one. It's a different challenge. With their limited exposure to English and far less exposure to the Elizabethan English or that culture and their points of view, it becomes quite a challenging task to convey Shakespeare to our students. A platform like this helps us to know varied ventures, varied paths carved out to interpret and comprehend Shakespeare. What Shakespeare had mentioned in his Caesar, Julius Caesar, after Caesar's assassination through the words of Cassius, have been proved true by the elaborate and erudite talk given by Madam just now. In how many ways Shakespeare has been interpreted and understood. Literary appreciation of Shakespeare using, analyzing his language, etc., was one way. But after that, it has become multidimensional approach. It has become a multidimensional approach from various points of view. It may be post-colonial, it may be feministic, it may be any other. Now, if you look at The Merchant of Venice, Shylock, the typical way, the classical way of understanding Merchant of Venice is not there. Instead, Shylock, the play is viewed from Shylock's point of view, a Jew. He appears to be a voice of the Jews in Germany. Portia, in the same play, is viewed from the feministic point of view. You may recall the words of Ellen Terry, who acted Portia, who played Portia, said that after the action is over, after a play is over, staging is over, she felt a spirit of conquering in herself, it seems. In modern stagings of The Merchant of Venice, Portia is not presented as in the guise of a man. Instead, she is presented as a lady herself. Look at the way things are dealt with. Why? There are myriad ways of presenting Shakespearean plays. Caliban's resistance, this is called Caliban's resistance, that portion where he resists for Prospero. There, Caliban becomes the voice of the colonized. Shylock becomes the hero of the Jews. I'm reminded of the words of a professor of mine who staunchly believed and who very strongly believed that The Tempest is a play of reconciliation and Prospero is a symbol of human love, affection, and forgiveness. He was, I must admit, blind to the way Prospero tries to take revenge against those who had done injustice to him. The inner, but also obvious, perhaps evident, spirit of revenge in him, he had overlooked. And he was perhaps deaf to the words of Caliban, or even Ariel for that matter. I feel that is not the way to approach a Shakespearean play. So we people in our classes followed a different method. We had a bilingual approach. Secondly, a multicultural approach. Thirdly, a multiliterary approach within our own limits. What do I mean by that? We would use English and Kannada, the regional language understood by most of the students, to strengthen the weakness of, or their, I don't want to call it inability, but inadequacies of understanding English. And this bilingual approach helped a lot in making students appreciate Shakespeare's plays, whichever play it was, or even if it was an extract. The second one was a multicultural and the multiliterary approach. We would try to have a comparison between, we would bring in illustrations from Indian culture, Indian literature, and compare that with Shakespearean plays. We would compare those two. Wherever there was some sort of comparability, whenever there was an occasion, we would bring in those issues. which we felt brought Shakespeare much closer to our students than what it would have been otherwise. Multi-literary approach is what I call multi-literary approaches. India is blessed with an opportunity of multilingualism. Most of our students know more than one language. So we would make use of that Kannada, a better known literature to them, Sanskrit, if not very well known to them as literature, at least they would know its stories, etc. Because our students, why Indians themselves, are never strangers to Mahabharata and Ramayana. And these illustrations, these comparisons would help us in conveying Shakespeare to our students in a more effective manner, I felt. We could compare a Lear with a Dhritarashtra. There are several contrasts, but definitely they are useful in bringing them, making them realize the spirit of the character. Macbeth's loneliness we would compare with Duryodhana's loneliness, or sometimes even Dharmaraja's loneliness. Hamlet's depressions would remind us of the bouts of depression that we see even in Rama, though eventually Rama is not that. Then we could take a comparison between Sita and a character like Miranda. Miranda and Kalidasa Shakuntala are wonderful comparisons to study. Of course, there is a difference. There is quite a lot of difference between what Shakuntala does and all that, the test that her love is put to. But in Miranda's case and Ferdinand's case, their love is put to test, intense test, though for only half an hour or so in that short play of 3 hours. But there is a test in any case. In this manner, we were able to find a space for our intellectual play and multi-literary as well as multicultural and multilinguistic, bilingual approaches. These were the things I feel that helped us in appreciating Shakespeare better, in motivating our students to comprehend Shakespeare better. This approach I would call from the known to the unknown. But understanding Shakespeare is in myriad forms and ways. Mrs. Prasanna Udipikar, who is going to speak now after me, is speaking on the specially abled characters in Shakespeare. This is, I feel, a fresh approach, a fresh understanding. In this manner, when we were able to couple our language with English, our culture with Shakespeare, what Shakespeare produces before us, presents before us, and Shakespearean literature with our literature, I felt that not only did we enjoy it better, even our students enjoyed and understood them much better. But what is the greatest help? As Shakespeare's own play, The Merchant of Venice, mentions, mercy is a dual benefit, twice blessed. It blesses him who shows mercy, and it blesses him who receives mercy. And I feel that the greatest benefit of teaching Shakespeare is that it blesses those who learn Shakespeare, and more than that, it blesses us who try to teach Shakespeare. It helped us in our own growth. It helped us in our understanding of life better. Our curricular syllabi may or may not have Shakespeare. I don't know, because the modern approaches are different, modern views are different. But we have Shakespeare, and we would like to enjoy Shakespeare. I would like to conclude this brief talk with one quotation of a small anecdote. There was a professor, there was one Right Honorable Srinivasa Shastri, Right Honorable Srinivas Shastri, who was also called Silver-tongued Srinivas Shastri because of his wonderful English, refined and polished English. He was in his 70s or so, an elderly person. Dr. D.V. Gundappa was very enthusiastic in those days about Sophocles, and he was reading the plays of Sophocles, and he offered a collection of the plays of Sophocles to Srinivas Shastri, Professor Srinivas Shastri, Right Honorable Srinivas Shastri. When he gave it to him, he said, "It seems, why do I need these new readings now, sir? My old Shakespeare and my old Ramayana suffice for me." What sufficed for Srinivas Shastri should do the same service to us also. We'd like to read more things, no doubt, but Shakespeare has enough treasure in him for us to explore for a lifetime, and that is our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Good evening to all. First and foremost, I thank the principal, management, HOD of English, faculties and the students of Seshadripuram Evening College for providing me such an opportunity to share my views on specially challenged characters in Shakespeare's plays. At the very outset, it is very essential for us to know who are categorized as specially challenged persons. The specially challenged are the people with disability. In short, we call them PWDs in the legal jargon. Understanding disability in Shakespeare's plays. Before understanding, it is necessary for us to have some knowledge on the various definitions of disability, definition of disability by World Health Organization, definitions of disability, disabled, deformity, etc., as discussed in Oxford English Dictionary. And also it is necessary for us when we study Shakespeare's plays and his characters to have fair knowledge about Goffman's, the great sociologist, Goffman's stigma theory, the theories of disability studies. And also it is necessary for us to know why Shakespeare projected his characters, disabled characters, in that particular way. It is necessary for us to understand this, to know history of attitude towards disability. And then we would discuss characterization of Shakespeare's plays. Definitions and understandings of disability have changed radically over the time. Hence, it is necessary, that's why I said it is necessary for us to dwell some time on the meaning of disability. Traditionally, disability was perceived as the tragic problem of unfortunate individuals, whereas now disability is often seen as a form of social oppression and social exclusion. Then what exactly do we mean when we use the term disability? Disability is a disadvantage or deficiency, especially a physical or mental impairment that interferes with or prevents normal achievement in a particular area or something that hinders or incapacitates. Friends, it is very essential for us to know here that all these definitions that we are discussing today are definitions which belong to the definer and not the defined. It is the normal people who have made these definitions and not the deformed people or disabled people. According to the definition of WHO, disability is described into three distinct folds. That is impairment, handicap, and disability. It was in 1980 this classification was done because usually impairment disability and handicap were used synonymously. They were used as synonyms. Hence, a clear um, definition is given for these. Impairment refers to any loss or abnormality of psychological or physiological or anatomical structure or function. Disability refers to any restriction or lack resulting from an impairment of ability to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal for a human being. Now, handicap. Handicap is a disadvantage for a given individual resulting from an impairment or disability that limits or prevents the fulfillment of a role that is normal. It could be depending on age, it could be depending on sex, social or cultural factors also, according to the individuals, as per the individuals. Now, moving on to the next definition, that is how it is discussed in Oxford English Dictionary, OED. Are you able to see my PPT? Yes?
Yes, madam.
Yes, okay. Now, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word disability and its cognates, disabled were used in three senses during early modern era. First, there was the legal sense of to disable, to hinder or restrain a person or a class of persons from performing acts or enjoying rights which would otherwise be open to them. Second, there was the medical sense of having a disability or a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. Third, there was a conceptual sense attached to this word of being disabled for any reason whatsoever, rendered incapable of action or use. There is no clear philological trajectory to the development of these senses, these meanings. Disable as a verb was first used in the legal sense in 1445 and in the medical sense around 1492, but then not in the conceptual sense until 1582. Disability, the word was used as a noun in the noun form in the conceptual sense in 1545 and in legal sense in 1579. Disabled, the adjective, was used in the conceptual sense in 1598, but not in the medical sense until 1633. Now, why I'm mentioning the dates is because this again will help us in understanding the words used, disabled, deformed, the words which we come across in Shakespeare's plays. Now, moving on to the theorists. The theorists of disability studies, which emerged in 1980s, primarily in America, UK, and Canada, have been critical of the World Health Organization classification, and a new definition, a social model of disability, emerged. A social model of disability here refers to, yes, it refers to the casual relationship between impairment and handicap, arguing that it is not impairment per se which is disabling, but the environment in which an individual finds him or herself. A social model also seeks to move away from a medical model of disability, which focuses on the cure and care of people with impairments. Theorists argue that disability is a form of social oppression. In the medical model, it is an attribute of an individual, such as deformity, disease, or illness, which causes disability. In contrast, in the social model, things like deformity, disease, and illness do not directly cause disability. Instead, these impairments encounter negative social reactions such as prejudice, hostility, and discrimination, and it is these features of society which cause disability to the person. So sociologists also argue that disabled people experience stigma, which is powerful, discrediting label that can change, even spoil the way in which the individual is perceived. So this idea was proposed by the sociologist Irving Goffman, who argued that there are two types of stigmatizing conditions. You can see it here on the screen. Goffman's three types of stigma: abominations of the body, physical disfigurement, readily apparent, known as first glance. Now this I'm going to apply to Shakespeare's characters. Blemishes of individual character inferred from known records or experience may be less apparent. Tribal stigma or race, nation, and religion. Hereditary stigmas have the unique potential to discredit entire families, may also be less visible. Now, Shakespearean characters, many of whom are hybrids, are so vividly realized that they seem to have achieved a life independent of the worlds they inhabit. Hamlet's name has become synonymous with excessive rationalizing and idealism. Othello's jealousy, Lear's madness, Macbeth's ambition, Romeo and Juliet's star-crossed love, Shylock's flinty heart, all of these psychic states and the characters who represent them have become familiar landmarks in Western culture. Shakespeare was often praised by his fellows, but friendly rival and ferocious satirist Ben Jonson said it best. He said, Shakespeare was indeed honest and of an open and free nature, and he was not of an age, Shakespeare was not of an age, but for all time. Now, before moving on to understanding the characters, it is necessary for us to see whether, to understand disabled people, cursed or blessed, what was the attitude of the people towards treatment of disabled people. So the history of disabilities, to learn about the treatment people with disabilities, is quite shocking. Babylonians would look at babies born with disabilities as good predictors of the future. Romans would drown disabled babies. Greeks were the first ones to talk about eugenics. They also thought that those born deaf couldn't think rationally. In Old Testament times, disability was linked to sin. Nevertheless, those born with disabilities were protected and people were taught to treat them kindly. In New Testament, it became a source of miracles when Jesus healed the disabled. Now, the last point I said, in New Testament, there is mention of Jesus Christ who healed a disabled. Now, coming to Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare's first depiction of disability was also in a very funniest manner. It came in Henry VI in an episode familiar from the English chronicles, the spurious miracle at St. Albans, which satirized the acceptance of a too superstitious King Henry. A dope enters the scene, shouting, a miracle, rejoicing that today a blind man has received his sight at the shrine of St. Albans. It would be impossible for the actor playing King Henry to overplay the king's response, a sumptuous prayer glorifying the goodness of God. Now, Simcox, the blind man, arrives on the scene and says that he was born blind, and moreover, that his friends must now carry him around because he once fell from a tree and lost his ability to walk. Much more skeptical than King Henry, the Duke of Gloucester wants to know what a blind man was doing climbing trees. Then Simcox wants his new eyesight, naming the colors he sees all around him. Gloucester points out that a man blind from birth would have no idea which color is red. Gloucester musters up his own miracle. He lashes Simcox with a whip causing the lame man to jump straight to his feet and sprint off the stage. A crowd behind him crying, "A miracle, a miracle." So, in this scene, as in many societies, it is the normals who define, control, and manipulate what counts as disability. As in the New Testament of the Bible, we have already referred to, disability is simply the platform for a display of God's power. The disabled person meets both ridicule and violence, and in the end, the disabled man is made to run off the stage and out of the sacred society of the normal people. So there is no acceptance. This also we can see here. So Shakespeare anticipated by nearly 400 years what Goffman argued in his book Stigma. Stigmatized persons have enough of their situations in life. Shakespeare's list of the different kinds of stigma is slightly different than Goffman, but like Goffman, Shakespeare used a single system to think about and represent different kinds of differentness. Physical deformity, we see it in Richard III, Falstaff, and Caliban. Racial minority, we see in Aaron and Aaron the Moor, Shylock the Jiff, and bastardy as with Don John and Edmund. So from a philological perspective, we must reject the notion that Renaissance writers such as Shakespeare saw disabled as an identity. Most obviously because those writers did not use that word in that sense, while words such as deformed, monstrous, and stigmatic abound, as well as more specific terms for more specific conditions were used. Instead of using disabled for a blind person, they used to use the word blind, deaf, lame, mad, etc. Where these were brought together, and these were not brought together under single rubric disabled at all. They were the separate names, words were used for these people. Now, moving on to the other plays of Shakespeare, just a mention is being made here. Let us, yes. There are certainly patterns in Shakespeare's treatment of the blind. Old Gobbo in The Merchant of Venice and the Earl of Gloucester in King Lear, for example, are both blind men deceived by their sons, and there are certainly patterns in Shakespeare's treatment of epileptics. Julius Caesar, Henry IV, Othello, and Macbeth. But Shakespeare did not bring the blind and the epileptic together under a single identity of disabled. I have taken only some of Shakespeare's plays due to paucity of time. Now, The Taming of the Shrew. The lines about Catherine, a character, Catherine limbs come in the context of Petruchio's plainly professed attempt to confound Catherine by contravening the evident sense of things. Even though he has not, Petruchio claims that he has heard that Catherine is coarse, coy, and curt, while he finds her pleasant, playful, sweet, sincere, soft, affable, mild, kind, and courteous, a flattering description of Catherine that clearly contradicts the direct evidence we have of her character from earlier in the play. Even though, again, he has not, Petruchio claims he has heard that Catherine limps when she walks, while he finds her to stand straight and walk with a lovely gait. He tells, "Why does the world report that Kate doth limp? O slanderous world, Kate, like the hazel twig, is straight and slender, and as brown in hue as hazelnuts, and sweeter than the kernels. Oh, let me see thee walk, thou dost not halt." Obviously, there is no way to confirm that Petruchio has previously heard about Catherine or the accuracy of his statement about her body, but both are likely fabrications. Moreover, the reading that insists upon a disabled Catherine reveals a tendency in some disability studies scholarship to project disability upon someone who may not have or need or want that identity, and to reduce that person to an extension of that disability. much like a single passage being plucked out of the context and bullied into changing the entire meaning of a play. This is what we see there. Then moving on to another play which we see is Richard III by William Shakespeare again. Here, there is physical deformity which we see in Richard III. The treatment of Aaron or Edmund resembles that of a disabled character like Richard III, but we should not project the language of disability outward from Richard to Aaron and Edmund. Instead, we need to change the terms of our discussion, for the field of disability studies in and of itself cannot account for the fact that Richard III, a physically marked character, Aaron the Moor, a racially marked character, and Edmund the Bastard, a hereditarily marked character, all belong to the same representational system. Shakespeare used a single system to think about and represent different kinds of differentness. Physical deformity, racial minority, and bastardy, all put together. As another example, we can consider that in Italian, the word gobbo means hunchbacked. And some scholars have squeezed this term to suggest that Lancelot Gobbo of the Merchant of Venice is like Richard III and Caliban physically deformed. So it must be said that this reading receives no support from the text, but Shakespeare did not thematize deformity with Gobbo as he did with Richard and Caliban, although formally speaking, Gobbo does occupy a place in the structure of the play similar to that of Shakespeare's stigmatized characters, not only Richard and Caliban, but indeed Shylock himself. Now, moving on to the next play is Merchant of Venice. As in life, the presence of stigma is beset with uncertainty, its operation with uneasiness, and its outcome with a mixture of happiness and sadness. So in Rome, disabled children were drowned in Tiber, while people considered to be mentally defective were prohibited from marrying. In Greek legend, Theseus is a blind seer who, while deprived of worldly sight, has magical insight and prophetic knowledge. So this being the backdrop will help us, understanding this will help us why Lancelot Gobbo of the Merchant of Venice is projected as a deformed person in that way. Thus, in conclusion, I would say that the encounter with disability in Shakespeare's works is not only similar to the same encounter in our daily lives, it is representative of the problems of knowledge, certainty, and intersubjectivity that have been central to modern thought and life. So the encounter with disability in Shakespeare's works prompts very current social questions in us about the position of those who are different from the norm in the society. Thank you. Namaste.
A very good evening from Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, organizing this international webinar in association with California Baptist University and Bangalore University English Teachers Association. It's a pleasure, and the same topic says the pleasure of teaching Shakespeare. So it was a very nice webinar, and the supporting of the organizers who have brought about wonderful speakers. And also I would like to thank all the theme speakers and Professor Sir. And I would like to just summarize on the actual today's topics that have been counted. That is especially Dr. Melissa has taken the view of filmography, that too from the point of Japanese content and the Shakespeare's, how well it has been correlated in the films, and how actually the choreography and other aspects have been considered by the Shakespeare's view. Especially my madam has said about the Kurosawa and Shakespeare's adaptations. That she has also given wonderful examples from the Thorn of Blood, a Samurai, and the Macbeth, how it has been taken into considerations, and how the bloody end of the samurai era ended. And when we look at the Japanese history or the world history for the matter, what we can observe is man repeats himself over and over, the same mistakes what he has done. Madam has very well put that point, and which is also seen in today's world, that never man intentions can be seen to be very peaceful. It repeats again and again, the history repeats. Madam was consistently telling about this, and we can even see it in today's world also, how it's dragging on. And also Madam said about the Bad Sleep Well, the adaptation of Hamlet. Even there she emphasized how well the adaptations of the Shakespeare has been done in the films, and also in the Japanese adaptations, how well it has been taken up. And also I would like to say about the Professor MC Prakash sir, the teachings of Shakespeare, the changes from the plays and the Merchant of Venice, or the usage of multilingual languages to understand Shakespeare in a better way, and to understand Shakespeare, even if other languages have been adapting this plays, it has given a very well adaptations, and the viewers or the students enjoy the play in a very nice manner. And also it is much more easier to understand the play once local languages are also coming up in understanding Shakespeare. And in the last, I would like to just say that Professor Prasanna was dealing with a much more very concentrated way of pinpointing the actual disabled, how different places treated disabled, and how the treatments were there from Shakespeare's point of view. And she ultimately gave the summary to say that not only similar to the same encounters in our daily lives, how it is happening in our daily lives even today, the same thing was carried out even in those days, and the same type of things were happening even then. In the whole, I'd just like to say that Shakespeare, in his poems, in his use of the stress, even he was using the stress points, unstressed points also he was using it. But the way he emphasizes certain syllables in the words more than the others were so used to doing it that we may not notice it at first. But when you say the word slowly, you can easily identify them. For example, in every playwright, you could have seen these differences. If you are going reading faster, you may not have observed it, but when you start reading it slowly and try to understand it, it gives a total satisfaction of reading it. So it's been said that even in his iambic pentameter was easy for his actors to memorize and for the audience to understand, and because it's naturally suited to the English language of today's. So you can just say that the adaptations of Shakespeare's play goes again how you are understanding it, and how actually you are breaking up the whole meaning of it, because you cannot just take the whole as a summary. You will have to sometimes, even the phrases or even the idioms, whatever is coming, you will have to bring it into a simpler forms, try to understand the situation, and try to actually make it into a simplest words. Then you can be easily adapting it. So on the whole, I just want to thank the coordinators who have brought about this wonderful platform. Thanks to Dr. MC Prakash, Dr. Melissa, and also Professor Prasanna Udbikar. I would like to thank PC Narayan sir, Dr. Tamaya, Nagasudha madam, Darapa Konnur, and teaching staff, students, and all the participants, and also especially our students Deepika and Spandana. And also at last, I would like to thank NS Satish sir for these wonderful moments. Thank you one and all.